Welcome to Healthcare IT Today. I'm John Lynn, together with my colleague and friend Colin Hung. The world of technology and healthcare are ever-changing in new and novel ways, and that's why we love this stuff. So join us as we discuss the latest healthcare and health IT news, meshed together in new ways which help generate ideas and new perspectives. Plus, we'll have a little fun along the way. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about faking it till you make it. Does that approach work in healthcare? And be sure to follow the show on Twitter at the hashtag HITSM and our personal accounts at TechGuy and at Colin_Hung. Plus, check out our 16 years of health IT blog content at healthcareittoday.com. Are we faking it till we make it on this podcast? At the beginning, maybe.
I think at the beginning we were, John. But you and I both have imposter syndrome, so we always
don't
feel
really
like we're
know the
faking.
truth.
Yeah, we always feel like we're faking it until we make it. But yeah, I mean it's an interesting topic because of course Theranos is back in the news again, and all the stuff coming out that's being revealed from the trial and all the transcripts. I mean, it's just this, you can't make this stuff up, right? I mean, it almost reads like a Hollywood script. And it probably will be very, very soon, right?
Yeah, exactly. It's interesting how Hollywood goes after that. But it is crazy. I mean, like, it's so amazing that she was actually able to do it, right? I mean, that's like the fundamental thing for me is like, wait, she was able to fake it the way she did to the extent she did, and investors didn't stop her, potential customers, the media, like no one, called her out on it, which is absolutely amazing.
Well, for me, the human side of this trial is fascinating, right? Like on one hand, you had a person who was so motivated by public image and pressure from what she perceived to be outside forces like the investors.
Uh-huh.
And then on the inside, you had like so many people, who were just trusting, right? Like, I guess it kind of on the positive I take out of it is like, man, like we're actually generally pretty trusting of people because this was perpetuated for so long. But also inside, like I was just amazed at how much fear there was inside of the company. I've thankfully never been part of a company like that. But I can't imagine when when you hear these stories of the whistleblowers and the people who are ahead of the testing, who were kind of raising the red flag but felt really badly to do that, and they knew they were going to get fired, and they knew they were going to I can't imagine an environment like that.
Yeah. And I'll admit, I'm not an expert on the trial, but from the things I have read, she felt the pressure, but she drank the Kool-Aid too, right? Sure. I mean, she was eating up the black turtleneck comparison to Steve Jobs and all of that. So, on the one hand, I understand the pressure, but I also, think she should be held accountable for drinking it up and enjoying the limelight. But, to your point, it's amazing, one, that we are accepting and trusting, but related to that, I think, which I think plays into their story so well, is we wanted her to be right. Right. So, I mean, I don't know if we would have been as trusting if we weren't just so excited for that solution to actually come to the market. And because our desire was so great to have this in healthcare, we wanted to believe that it was true. And so we probably didn't do the due diligence that we would have done otherwise.
Yeah. I mean, and to go along with the topic that we're talking about today, I think very clearly Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos went way past the line in terms of an acceptable level of faking it till you make it.
Well, she didn't make it, I guess.
Yeah. but she totally faked it, right? But and to me, there's one thing to have confidence in your product and to believe in what you're doing. I mean, that to me is okay, right?
Yeah, that's true.
But to have faked results, to blatantly lie about the fact that your machine was doing X and Y results and achieving these results when in fact it wasn't, and not to even or to gloss over the fact that it failed 9 times out of 10. But you looked at the one positive and go, well, it's good enough, right? Like to me, that is way far beyond the line, which of course is what happened.
Think about it from the EHR perspective. We saw this as well. Many of the EHRs with their certification absolutely faked it until they got the certification. I mean, they literally hard coded the answers to the certification exam and created fraud. And the FTC came down on a number of these organizations for lying about their certification. And yet now you look at it, are they being held accountable? In many cases, not. I mean, if I were a person that was trying to select an EHR, there's no way I'd touch that EHR with a 10-foot pole. But I think people that were already with that EHR or maybe don't know the history, they're buying it up. And, I really haven't seen a lot of damage from it, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think that goes to a whole other discussion around accountability in general, right? In healthcare,
Sure.
but in specifically in health IT. I think the powers that be made an example of a few people to kind of make sure that they did something. But you're right. I mean, in the overall scheme, when you look at how much money was the penalty was and what how much money kind of went in the other way, it really was just a token, right? In terms of the penalty.
Well, in the corrupt way they look at it, and it's somewhat the entrepreneurial mindset. I forget what the largest damage was, but hundreds of million, I think, was for the largest one. But they just look at it and say, "Would I invest that penalty to create $1 billion business?" And they're like, "Yeah, why not?" So, yeah, one time I heard our friend Shahid Shah say that your innovation strategy should be your regulation strategy. And his idea was, how you approach regulation and where you push the boundaries of what regulations allow is part of an innovation strategy for many startup companies. So there is a fine line to walk there as far as trying to push the envelope and see how far you can go. But, how far do you really take it?
Yeah, that's so true. And to me, as a health IT company, the one area that I would say we would never fake it would be the results. Like if your product doesn't do A or B, or it performs one way, you can't say it performs another way. Like there's no way, to me, that's not faking it. That's just a blatant lie, right? Where I think, is a little bit gray is talking about your product roadmap, right?
Yeah.
Like your product roadmap is pretty fuzzy anyways. Like who knows what you're going to do 3 years from now? I mean, none of us
Sure.
could have predicted the pandemic, but and all of a sudden you had to jump
That
into
changed roadmaps.
exactly. Yeah, all the roadmaps went out the window and you were working on telehealth, right? Like that's pretty much what happened. So I think I won't say it's faking it, but there is a lot of gray area to say, well, we're thinking about working in these kind of features and kind of going in this direction. I think as the cynical people would look at that and, well, you're faking it. I mean, you don't know, and how can I treat what you're saying with any degree of certainty? But because it's the future anyways, it's sort of, well, I mean, there's no certainty, right? So to me, that's an acceptable level of faking it. And you're not really faking it. What you're making an educated guess, and your guess may be just as wrong as mine. So I'm okay with that. But where I'm not okay is obviously similar to what the Theranos situation was. It's faking and telling people that your product does A right now when it can't do it. That is not faking it.
Yeah, I mean, it's part of the lore of startups that, and often outside of healthcare, I think more than inside of healthcare, where they put together the PowerPoint deck around the product they want to offer and that they want to create and they know they can create. So I think that's maybe the slight difference that you're
Sure.
pointing out. They could create it, they just haven't yet. And so, and then they pitch it to someone and say, "Would you like this product?" Right? I mean, it's almost that MVP startup, what's your minimum viable product? Well, your minimum viable product is a great PowerPoint deck that defines what you could create, but you haven't yet because you're trying to test to see, does the market want something like this? Unfortunately, in healthcare, my experience with that is that most CIOs that see that say, "Nah, show it to me or I'm not going to buy it." And so they actually call BS on it. The exception is, can we become partners and co-create it? That would be a different discussion. But in healthcare, they don't buy PowerPoints, they buy demos, I think.
Well, I think you're right, have gotten smarter around that, especially given some of the early days of EHRs and even some early days of PACS systems and so forth, where there was a lot of, I'll call it image manipulation going on to show a product, right? um,
Yep.
and you're right. I think again, I don't think I personally would welcome a demonstration where someone said, "Hey, look, this is where we're going. We think we can get here in 6 months or 3 months, or hey, you know what? With your help, we might get here in a month, right? And would you like to get on board? I think that's a better answer today than it was years ago. Because I think before there was this sort of, if you haven't got it right now and you're not capable of building it, I'm not really going to help you. But I think the tide has shifted where people go, no, 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 I want to be involved in the co-create, right? Whereas before it was like, no, I want a finished product. And so I think today entrepreneurs and their clients, especially in healthcare, are much more attuned or welcoming of that message of, hey, I don't have it right now, but this is where I want to go. And I could really use your help to really refine that vision and get towards it. I don't think people are as afraid to say that today as they were years ago.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's one trend that goes against that and kind of argues against that. And that's the trend that most CIOs that I talk to, they want to buy the enterprise product. They don't want to buy a bunch of onesie twosie solutions.
Sure.
And so, unfortunately, many startups come and say, hey, I can transform this little slice of your problem. And guess what? Maybe they do it 1,000 times better than anyone else. Although in most cases, it's probably like 10x better, right? It's not 1,000 times better. So, it's 10x better and it is a better solution, has a better workflow, solves the problem better. And the CIOs look at it and say, yeah, I see that you solve, telehealth or remote patient monitoring for cardiology patients with this diagnosis, and you're really amazing at that. But how am I going to scale that across the 1,000 different diagnoses that I need to do it for? And I think that's where they get scared and they kind of pull out and say, nah, like I love what you're doing. Can you sell to this other vendor and teach them how to do it? Because I need it to work across all, 100 disease states that I'm really focused on. So I think, when it comes to many hospitals, health systems, they really shun that collaboration on a very tight thing and say, I need an enterprise product.
Yeah, you're right in one sense, John. I agree that for small companies and startups, they have to overcome this challenge or this approach, right? But I will say, I've certainly heard a lot more stories of them doing exactly the co-creation, but with these larger vendors that they have. Like we hear these stories about people working with Microsoft, right, and working with Amazon or working with Epic or Cerner to co-create a brand new solution. To your point, they're going with the enterprise solution, like they're incumbent, but they're willing to work with that incumbent to try some new things, right? Like, or to co-create a solution in an area maybe they're not very strong in today. So maybe you're right. Maybe there's not a lot where a startup can get involved in that, but certainly these large enterprise players, I'm seeing a lot of the co-creation talk, anyways. And I think it's encouraging. But you're right. It is tough to get if you're small to try and get into one of these co-create projects.
Yeah, we just have too many problems to solve. That's the real issue.
Never a problem in healthcare. Hey, if you're just tuning in, you're listening to Healthcare IT Today with John Lynn and Colin Hung. And today we're talking about faking it until you make it in healthcare. Is that an acceptable approach? And what are the boundaries of it? So let me ask you this, John. Does it matter in healthcare who you're deceiving? Meaning, like, investors versus customers versus employees versus press versus patients?
Well, yeah, I mean, it's a complicated question, right? And the idea of deceiving is hard for me from a moral level, right? Deception and lies is a tough one, right? I think, let's go through some that you mentioned. Investors, to me, like if you cannot tell the full truth to your investors, then you have the wrong investors. Like those investors are bought in for your success and they need to know the full truth so that they can help you and they can connect you to those resources. I understand it's a fine balance for a CEO to make sure that the investors are still behind them. And especially if your investors have different views, maybe that's the one caveat where there's some slight wiggle room there as you execute on your vision. But for the most part, if you can't tell your investors everything, then that's a massive problem. And maybe you have the wrong investors.
It's an interesting one. I think I agree with you for the most part. I think investors are one group. You're playing with their money, right? And why would you tell them something that wasn't true? Because it's going to come out and it's just worse. It's going to be
Yeah.
worse right later
And they could
because
help you maybe,
and they can
right?
help you,
To
right?
let
Like,
them.
yeah, exactly. If you're transparent with them, that there's a reason you brought them on as an investor. Hopefully, they're strategic. They have the network. You should lean on them.
And they've been through it before, probably, right? Like you're not going to surprise them.
Right, right. Where I think where again, I never would advocate deceiving somebody, but I think where it gets a lot more tricky and gray is with employees, actually. So, and I use this case more. I'm thinking more about on the health IT side. If you're facing a financial crunch, right? But you have a line to credit or a line to a new investor that's coming in, it's just not here yet. Like, do you transparently tell all your employees that? I'm not sure a lot of cultures are like that where the people would stick around, right? Because you can imagine what can happen, right? If you start saying, hey, well, we may not pay payroll next month, like you might as well just ring the bell and have everyone resign, right? Like, so I can see there to go, well, are you going to be completely 100% transparent in that situation? I would go, most corporate cultures probably aren't like that, right? And so they would not tell that part of the story until the financing came through, right? So there, it's hard. Again, I don't know if you're deceiving somebody as opposed to you're just not going to worry them about something that you're already working on, you have a solution for, you've already talked to your other investors about it, right? Like,
Mhm.
anyway, that one's tricky for me.
Yeah, and no doubt there's a lot of people who've been burned by that. I know when I was in college, I was working at a startup company, and my boss came to me, and it was just part-time job doing their website, so it wasn't a huge deal. But for me, the money in college was a huge deal, right? Like
Sure.
I needed that money, right? And anyways, I remember my boss coming to me, which I wasn't in all the regular meetings, just as a part-time person, but he came to me and he's like, hey, we're working on this bridge financing and we're not sure it's going to come through, and we'll be good for the money, but we may miss payroll. And I was like, what? It was my first time ever, like, that's possible, that's legal. Like, like in my head, I didn't understand all the options and potentials, right? And to their credit, I think they did miss one, but then they made it up pretty quickly in the next month or something, so I never had to deal with it. But it does come down to culture. Are you a culture that shares everything, or are you a culture that just head to the grindstone? The problem is if you don't share, that ends up paying, there's costs to be paid if you don't share, and then you don't get that financing, and then they're like, why didn't you tell me earlier? So my own personality is definitely share earlier rather than later. And you and I have had this experience, I think, where it's like if you share earlier, well, then those people come behind you and they rally behind your company to solve whatever problem it is. So I think that's part of the calculus too with your employees is, can they help to solve the problem? And if so, then maybe it's right to share.
Again, hard to argue with you there. And, I think it really does depend on your corporate culture. I mean, this is where investing in it really pays off, right? So that when you do get into trouble, when there is a tough time, that you have other currency that you can trade in on, right? The fact that you were there for them when they needed the help and
Yep.
so forth. So I totally agree with you on that. It just is. I mean, I empathize with entrepreneurs who are in this situation, right? Like it's so hard to know which way is the right way because, if you be 100% transparent, and there is that one group who immediately decides, you know what, this is the excuse I needed to leave, and that cripples your company. Well, then what have you really done, right? Like
Yeah.
you've just created another problem that you now have an even harder time to recover from. Anyway, it's no right answer there, but I can see the ruminations going on in someone's mind around this.
Yeah, the press is a challenging one too, because if you lie to them, that's idiotic because that's going to come back to bite you.
Sure.
But there is, something about what do you share so that they write about the good stuff versus the more challenging things. And there's definitely a nuance there that, as far as what do you share and how do you frame the story and how do you, push the story to them. There's definitely nuance there as far as, but if you outright lie, you're going to burn yourself with those press, and that's going to come back to bite you. So I think that's never a good strategy. But framing the story in a way that's easy for them to tell the good parts of your company, that's called PR.
No, you're absolutely right there, and I think it's similar to to customers, right? Like, and by customers we don't mean patients. I mean here it's like the actual health systems or the
Right.
payers, and whoever's using your systems. There, I think you can't outright lie. You're going to get caught eventually, and it's going to be worse having told that lie. However, I think there is a little bit to be said around confidence in your team, right? If a customer says, "Hey, I'd really like this enhancement to be done, and it's really important that we have it within, I don't know, let's say 2 months," and you're kind of like scratching your head going, "Well, I'm not really sure we can build it in 2 months, but I know Johnny over in the IT department, he's, or development, he's really, really good. He could probably whip this up in like a month if I gave him enough time, you know, and then you basically say, yeah, yeah, of course we can do it, right? Like that to me is okay because there you're banking on your own people. Hopefully you're familiar with those people. It's not really a lie because in terms of could you do it in 2 months? Yeah, if you dropped everything else, you might be able to do it, right?
Yeah.
But to me, sometimes that has to happen because that if that jeopardizes the deal or if this is a super important feature that is going to help other customers down the road, you might say yes to something even though at that moment you faked it, right? Because you had no idea whether or not you could really do.
Yeah, the exceptions, the salespeople who just fake it and don't actually know if the company's going to
Sure.
deliver it. I hate those. But yeah, to your point, Steve Jobs illustrated this, right? That hey, if I push it and I do a big goal, they might accomplish more. I mean, there's literally called BHAG, right? Which we had a previous episode, right? Big, hairy, audacious goal actually drives higher performance. I just watched the movie Martian, which I think it's an old school movie, but my son had found it. We watched it. I'd never seen it, and they're basically left someone on Mars, and how do they get him back? And they keep moving the timelines up earlier and earlier in order to save his life. And I mean, obviously it's Hollywood, but the idea of having that stretch goal that people find creative solutions to solve for and do it is real. So I think that's the balance, is like, how do you drive a company towards those audacious goals so that they over deliver and overperform versus lying to someone and deceiving them when there's never that intent? Like, that's bad, right?
That is bad. But let's talk about the last area, John. Does faking it till you make it work in marketing?
Yeah, again, I mean, I think it kind of goes back to the message we said about customers. If you over promise, then it's just going to end poorly. You may even make the sell, but then it's going to go bad, and that's not good for the long term part of the company. And that's why you don't let salespeople do it who are driven by sales quota, right? You want to make these decisions based on the long term piece of the company, because if you bring them on under a false pretense or a lie or even deception, right, and then they get the product and they realize it's not that, well, then you just ruined all the referral sales that could have come from that customer. And in healthcare, that's extremely important. They want to know, okay, let me talk to a customer, and they talk to their peers. So
Sure.
the grapevine spreads fast when you lie and then it's not, doesn't live up to that promise.
No, I totally agree with you there. Again, like there's little bits of gray, but mostly pretty black and white. You can't lie about something that you are able or not able to do because if you way overpromise, like Theranos did, and you deliver a product that's inferior and doesn't do half of what you said it did, you're just setting yourself up for a disaster, right? Because that's when lawsuits happen. That's when you'll have a pissed off customer who will tell five other customers of their peers not to deal with you. I mean, that
Yep.
is extremely painful, right? Like that's not something you want. However, I think there's a degree of faking it in in marketing that I think is actually prudent. Like for example, if you're a startup, if you're a new company, maybe you only have 10 customers or five customers. First of all, I don't think you can lie and say you have 20 and put
Sure.
20 logos
For
that you don't
sure.
have. But you can have a very professional looking website. You can design your website to look like an IBM. You can design your website to look like an Apple, a very large company. And to me, there's nothing wrong with that. Like you're giving off a projection of your big, classy, well-established company. And to me, that's okay because that's more around messaging, that's more around positioning. It's about the images you use. And yes, maybe some cynics would say that's a little bit of deception, but it's not, to me, it's more of you're projecting an image of yourself as opposed to promising something about yourself.
Yeah.
Right. Having those professional photographs of your founders, right? Like that kind of thing, as opposed to the ones taken on your iPhone, right? Like that to me is okay level of faking it, right? You're just projecting a different image than what you really are.
Yeah. And what's interesting is that kind of illustrates the culture of your company, that, hey, we can execute at a high level and we can perform something that's going to, produce good results. So yeah, I don't mind that either. As far as projecting that you're a professional company that can execute at a high level. And yeah, I mean, maybe your product is still immature in its development, but there, ideally, at least, there's some areas where you have a very mature product and you're still working on others, right? So I think that's part of the evolution of a startup. In fact, it's the dance that every startup company has to do, I think, with most organizations. And then it really is up to the customer to kind of suss that out and understand what is real and what is Memorex, right? And be able to do it. My favorite was with the EHR vendors. When I was doing a demo, I'd ask the question, can you do X? And they'd say yes. And you say, can you do Y? And they'd say yes. Well, it turns out it was kind of on me because I wanted them to do X and Y, and they can't do X and Y. And so, there is a fun balancing act. But, in my mind, that's still up to the customer, right? The customer needs to do it. And I need to understand, are you being transparent with me or are you trying to deceive me? And if I feel that you're trying to deceive me, then I'm probably done, right? Because that's not a good relationship.
Yeah. And I'll just end by saying one thing here, because I've talked to many physicians who are getting into health IT business. I think they're faking it in terms of their business prowess, right?
And their tech prowess,
right? And perhaps their tech prowess. And to me, again, like they're not that they're deceiving someone, but they're talking about how they've been in business for a while and how savvy they are, or how how hard they're going to be trying. Like, I think those are things that are okay, because I'm sure inside they feel like, man, I don't know what I'm doing. Like I was trained as a doctor. I didn't go to school to be a business person, but here I am doing a presentation in front of like 20 potential investors. I think that's an acceptable level of faking it, right? You're going to project the image of a competent business person, a competent technology leader. Yeah, exactly.
Yep. No, it's powerful to think about, but I mean, it's a fine line, right? Making sure that you're being honest and ethical, but not overselling it the way Theranos did.
For sure, for sure. Hey, listen, thanks to all of you who tuned into this episode of Healthcare IT Today. Find out more details about our show by checking out the programs page on healthcarenowradio.com. And please share your voice and engage with the community at healthcareittoday.com and on Twitter using the hashtag HITSM. I'm Colin Hung with my friend and health IT collaborator, John Lin. Thanks for listening and have a great week.